He screamed at his ex-wife in court, "I'm not paying one more dime, that child isn't mine." He was a wealthy executive and she was a struggling single mother. He thought he was saving money. He thought he was winning. He refused to pay for a life-saving surgery, telling her, "It's not my kid, not my bill." What he didn't know was that he was 100% right. The child wasn't his, and he had just refused to help the only son of the most powerful, dangerous, and secretive billionaire in the entire country. His petty refusal was about to cost him everything. The beige-colored walls of the King County family court hallway felt like they were closing in on Lauren Bell. Every shade of institutional despair was represented, from the scuffed linoleum floors to the flickering fluorescent light overhead that buzzed with an insistent, nerve-grating hum. Lauren clutched her worn leather satchel, her knuckles white. Inside it was a past due notice from the hospital that felt heavier than a brick. "They're late," said Ms. Evans, her legal aid attorney. Ms. Evans was a formidable woman in a rumpled blazer, her exhaustion matched only by her tenacity. "It's a power move. They want you stewing." Lauren, a talented black woman whose design portfolio had once buzzed with potential, now just felt numb. "It doesn't matter, he'll just lie. He always lies." As if summoned, the hallway doors swung open. Brent Wallace, her ex-husband, strode in. He wasn't just walking. He was performing. He wore a bespoke navy suit that probably cost more than Lauren's rent for 6 months. On his arm was Tiffany, his new wife, a woman who looked like she was assembled from an Instagram filter, all sharp angles and expensive highlights. She smirked at Lauren, a tiny, cruel pulling of her lips. "Lauren," Brent said, his voice booming with false sincerity. He adjusted the cufflink on his $10,000 watch. "You look tired. This whole thing must be so stressful for you." "Let's just get this over with, Brent," Lauren said, her voice a low tremor. Inside courtroom 3B, the air was stale. Judge Alani, a woman with zero patience for games, peered down from her bench. "Mr. Wallace, you are here on a motion to compel payment for child support which you are 3 months in arrears on. You were ordered to pay this in your signed divorce decree." Brent's lawyer, Mr. Holloway, a shark from the high-rise firm of Garland, Price & LLP, stood smoothly. "Your Honor, my client is not refusing to be supportive. He is simply requesting verification. Since the divorce, my client has come to harbor significant and troubling doubts about the paternity of the child, Leo Bell." Lauren's blood ran cold. Ms. Evans shot to her feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a tactic. The divorce decree is final. Paternity was never contested during the marriage. This is just a cruel delay tactic to financially starve my client." Holloway smiled, a thin reptilian expression. "On the contrary, Your Honor. My client believes he was a victim of paternity fraud. He is formally requesting a DNA test. Until such a test can be administered and the results confirmed, he feels it is financially irresponsible to continue payments." Brent leaned forward, his face a mask of practiced concern. "I just want the truth, Your Honor. Is that so wrong?" Lauren felt the trap snap shut. She knew the truth. Leo wasn't Brent's, but that wasn't the point. Brent had functioned as his father for the first 4 years of his life. The divorce decree which he signed stipulated the support. He was using this, her deepest secret, as a weapon. If she refused the test, she looked guilty. If she accepted the test, the results would financially sever him from her and Leo forever. He was pinning her against the wall, and he knew it. "Ms. Bell," the judge asked, her voice softening slightly. Lauren's throat was tight. "He is sick, Your Honor. My son is sick. He needs medication. He needs specialists. Brent knows this. A sick child deserves to know who his real father is," Brent said loud enough for the court reporter to get it down. "I'm not paying for another man's responsibility." The humiliation was a physical force pressing the air from her lungs. She saw the calculation in Brent's eyes. He didn't just want to stop paying, he wanted to destroy her. He wanted to see her beg. Judge Alani sighed, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "Mr. Wallace, you signed a decree. You have a legal obligation. However, I cannot force Ms. Bell to submit her child to a DNA test. I also cannot in good conscience ignore a formal claim of paternity fraud." She banged her gavel. "I am tabling the motion to compel. We will set a hearing to discuss the paternity claim. In the meantime, I am ordering a temporary reduction in support pending that hearing." It was a devastating blow. A reduction meant zero. He had won. Lauren stumbled out of the courtroom, the buzzing in her ears drowning out the sound of Tiffany's light, mocking laughter. Brent caught her arm in the hallway, his grip surprisingly tight. "You should have just taken the settlement, Lauren," he whispered, his voice laced with venom. "Now you have nothing. You and that kid. Good luck paying for his doctors now." He released her arm, leaving a red mark, and strode away. Tiffany tucked under his arm. Lauren leaned against the beige wall, her legs shaking. The past due notice in her bag wasn't just a bill anymore. It was a countdown, and the clock had just run out. The drive home to her small two-bedroom apartment in the Willow Creek complex was a blur of self-recrimination. Lauren's 2012 Honda rattled every time she stopped at a light, a constant reminder of her financial precarity. She passed a toy store one Leo always pointed at and felt the familiar pang of guilt. She couldn't even afford a $5 action figure, let alone the tens of thousands of dollars in medical debt that Brent had just shrugged off. She parked and sat in the car for a full 5 minutes, trying to compose herself. She had to be strong for Leo. She opened the apartment door. "Mommy," a small voice called. Leo, her 6-year-old son, was on the couch, wrapped in his favorite superhero blanket. He was small for his age, with intelligent, soulful eyes that held a shadow of the illness he'd carried since birth. He had a congenital heart defect, one that required constant monitoring and a cocktail of expensive medications. "Hey, my little superhero," Lauren said, forcing a bright smile. "How are you feeling?" "My chest feels bubbly," he said, coughing a dry, papery cough. Alarm bells went off in Lauren's head. "Bubbly. Okay, let's check your—" She didn't finish the sentence. Leo's eyes rolled back in his head and he slumped over unconscious. Leo. The next hour was a nightmare of sirens and sterile white light. They were at City General Hospital, a place Lauren knew too well. The ER doctor, a young man with exhaustion etched around his eyes, spoke to her in the hallway. "His condition has deteriorated, Ms. Bell. The atrial septal defect is worsening. He's in heart failure." "What?" "No, we had a checkup. They said he was stable." Lauren stammered the words, catching in her throat. "These things can be unpredictable," the doctor said gently. "He needs a specialist procedure, a transcatheter device closure. The best pediatric cardiac surgeon for this specific complex case. He's at Boston Children's Hospital." "Boston?" Lauren felt the floor drop away. "We're in Seattle. How do we get him there?" "A medical transport. But Ms. Bell, the cost? Your insurance?" Lauren already knew. Her marketplace plan, the best she could afford as a freelance designer, barely covered in-state emergencies. "It won't cover it, will it?" The doctor looked away. "The out-of-network costs for the transport, the surgery, and the post-op care, we're estimating it at over $400,000. Lauren felt the air leave her lungs. $400,000. It was an impossible, absurd number. It wasn't money. It was a wall. He needs this, Ms. Bell. Soon. Lauren's mind raced. She had no one. Her parents were gone. Her savings were a joke. There was only one person in the world who had this kind of money. She walked to the end of the hallway, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold her phone. She dialed Brent's number. He picked up on the third ring. What Lauren calling to beg? His voice was slurred. He was clearly celebrating his courtroom victory. "Brent, please," Lauren sobbed, abandoning all pride. "It's Leo. He's in the hospital. He's in heart failure. He needs a surgery, Brent. An emergency surgery. They have to fly him to Boston. It costs. It's $400,000. Please, Brent. You have the money. You can call it a loan. I'll pay you back, I swear. There was silence on the line, then a muffled sound. He was talking to Tiffany. Lauren could hear her faint, sharp voice. Don't you dare, Brent. It's a scam. Tell her to get a job. Brent came back on the line, his voice now cold and hard, all traces of alcohol gone. $400,000. Are you out of your mind? He will die, Brent. He will die. Please, I'm begging you. Whatever you think of me, he's just a little boy. He called you daddy for 4 years. And you let me, he roared. You let me believe he was mine. You committed fraud, Lauren. This is what you get. Please. No. Listen to me, Brent said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. This is the last time we are going to speak. Not my kid, not my Bill. Get it? You want money? Go find his real father. I'm done. The line went dead. Lauren stared at the phone. Not my kid, not my Bill. The words echoed in the sterile silence of the hospital. He had done it. He had finally, truly, and completely abandoned them. She slid down the wall, her body racked with dry, silent sobs. She was alone. Leo was dying. And she had no options left. Or perhaps she had one. A single, terrifying, impossible option she had sworn she would never take. Lauren's mind flashed back 7 years to a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Her marriage to Brent was already a corpse, though neither had signed the death certificate. He was emotionally abusive, manipulative, and increasingly cruel. She had moved out, staying in a friend's spare room, and had just begun divorce proceedings. She was working as a junior graphic designer, and her firm had been hired to design the branding for a high-profile, ultra-exclusive charity gala for Aperture Dynamics, a tech company she'd barely heard of. She was there to oversee the digital displays. The event was a sea of black ties and glittering gowns. Lauren, in her simple black dress, felt like a sparrow in a flock of peacocks. She was standing by her display, sipping a club soda, when a man approached her. He wasn't like the other men. He wasn't loud. He wasn't preening. He was quiet, with intelligent, piercing gray eyes and an aura of intense, focused energy. He wore a simple dark suit, no tie. "This is your work," he said. It wasn't a question. "It is," Lauren said, surprised. "You understand negative space. It's balanced. Most people just add noise." They talked for over an hour, not about tech or money or the gala. They talked about art, about the color theory of Matisse, about the loneliness of the city. He introduced himself only as George. He was kind. He was respectful. And for the first time in years, Lauren felt seen. Their affair was brief, intense, and profoundly secret. It lasted only 2 weeks. Lauren knew it couldn't last. He was in a different world. Then, as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone. His project in the city was over. He left her with a simple, respectful goodbye and a handshake. A month later, during a bitter argument with Brent over the divorce terms, there was a terrible, misguided attempt at reconciliation. It was a mistake born of Lauren's exhaustion and loneliness. 2 months after that, Lauren discovered she was pregnant. She knew with a certainty that was bone deep that the child was George's. The timelines were exact. But George was a ghost. She had no last name, no phone number. Brent, in a self-serving twist, assumed the child was his, a product of their failed reconciliation. Lauren, seeing the predatory gleam in Brent's eyes, made a choice. She never confirmed his paternity. She never denied it. She used the ambiguity to get the divorce done. She let the assumption stand because it was her only leverage to escape. The divorce decree signed by Brent listed one child of the marriage, Leo, and stipulated the child support. For Lauren, it wasn't fraud. It was a desperate act of self-preservation, a way to get her and her unborn son away from a toxic, controlling man. She would raise her son alone. She had tried once to find George. She had one clue: the business card he'd given her, not with his name but with the company logo. Aperture Dynamics. Now sitting in the fluorescent hell of the City General waiting room, her son's life hanging by a thread, she pulled her laptop from her satchel. Her hands were still shaking, but a new cold resolve was settling in. Brent's words, "Go find his real father." Fine. She would. She opened Google and typed Aperture Dynamics. Her world didn't just shatter, it evaporated. Aperture Dynamics wasn't just a tech company. It was one of the largest, most powerful, and most secretive corporations on Earth. They were global leaders in AI, aerospace, and biomedical engineering. And at the top of the search results, under founder and CEO, was a face she knew. It was George. But his name wasn't George. His name was Gideon Devereaux. Lauren fell down a rabbit hole of articles. The reclusive trillionaire. The man who owns the future. The Howard Hughes of the 21st century. He was a man who moved armies with a single phone call, who altered global markets with a whisper. He was fiercely private, never photographed, and lived in an undisclosed fortress-like compound. This was the man she'd discussed Matisse with. This was the man who had held her hand and told her she had a beautiful mind. This was Leo's father. Lauren stared at the screen, her heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm. Contacting him wasn't like calling an old boyfriend. It was like trying to send a message to a god on Olympus. How did you reach a man who didn't want to be found? She found a public-facing info at email address for Aperture Dynamics. It felt like throwing a paper airplane into a hurricane. She stared at the blank, composed screen for 10 minutes. What could she possibly write? Dear Mr. Devereaux, you don't know me, but, to whom it may concern, I am the mother of your son. It was all wrong. He would delete it. His security would flag it as extortion. A nurse walked by the waiting room entrance. Ms. Bell, the doctor needs to talk to you about options. That word options snapped her into focus. There was no time for etiquette. She opened the email. She attached 2 files. The first was the photo she'd taken of Leo last Christmas, asleep under the tree, a peaceful, angelic look on his face. The second was a PDF of the diagnosis from City General with the procedure required line highlighted. She typed a single sentence in the subject line, paternity. In the body she wrote, "My name is Lauren Bell. We met 7 years ago at the Aperture Gala. You called yourself George. This is your son. His name is Leo. He is in City General Hospital and he is dying. He needs a surgery his doctors here can't perform. His blood type is AB negative, just like yours." She hit send. Then she put her head in her hands and prayed. 2 days passed. 2 days of agonizing cellular-level terror. Leo was moved to the pediatric ICU, a forest of tubes and blinking machines. His breathing was shallow. Lauren hadn't slept, surviving on vending machine coffee that tasted like burnt plastic and the adrenaline of pure fear. She checked her email every 30 seconds. Nothing. The sent email sat in her outbox, a testament to her desperation. She had called the specialist in Boston herself, begging, but was politely and firmly told there was a waiting list and a requirement of prepayment in full. She was sitting by Leo's bedside, reading him a storybook he couldn't hear when her phone vibrated. It was an unknown number with a private caller ID. She almost ignored it. "Hello," she answered, her voice raw. "Is this Ms. Lauren Bell?" The voice was female, professional, and held the temperature of liquid nitrogen. Yes, this is. "My name is Ms. Shaw. I am the executive counsel for the office of Gideon Devereaux. We received your email." Lauren stood up so fast the plastic chair screeched against the floor. Did he see it? Please, my son?" "Mr. Devereaux is aware of your correspondence," Ms. Shaw said, her tone unwavering. "He has authorized me to take a statement. I need you to confirm on a recorded line that you are claiming your son Leo Bell is the biological child of Mr. Devereaux." Yes, he is. I can prove it. I don't know a baby book photos." That will not be necessary, Ms. Shaw interrupted. A team is being dispatched to your location. They are from a private medical diagnostics firm. They will be taking a DNA sample from your son. A courier is already en route to a secure location with a comparison sample from Mr. Devereaux. We will have preliminary results in 4 hours. 4 hours? Lauren stammered. But the hospital... The hospital has already been contacted. All of your son's medical files have been transferred to Mr. Devereaux's personal physicians. Do not speak to anyone. Do not leave the hospital. The team will be with you in 20 minutes. The line clicked dead. Lauren stared at the phone. It wasn't a rescue. It felt like an acquisition. Exactly 19 minutes later, 2 people in crisp, unmarked black scrubs entered the ICU. They were polite, silent, and efficient. They gently took a swab from Leo's cheek, secured it in a bio-sealed container, and were gone. Lauren was left alone again, the silence of the room somehow louder. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in a sprawling compound nestled in the mountains of Wyoming, Gideon Devereaux watched the exchange on a secure feed. He hadn't been George in years. That was a life he'd briefly tried to live, an experiment in anonymity that he'd abandoned as too risky. He had seen the email. Ms. Shaw, his gatekeeper for 20 years, had flagged it. She'd seen the thousands of extortion attempts, the claims, the lies. But this one was different. The name, the gala, the quiet specificity. When he saw the picture of the boy, something in his insulated, hyper-controlled world fractured. The boy had his eyes. "Shaw," he'd said, his voice quiet. "Sir, get the jet ready. And get me everything on Lauren Bell, her financials, her ex-husband, everything. And find out who holds the debt for Ascent Capital Partners." Ascent, sir. The ex-husband, Brent Wallace. Find his leverage. I want to know who owns him. Now he waited. The DNA results were being processed. His medical team was already reviewing Leo's charts, flagging the incompetence of the city general cardiologists. His private phone buzzed. It was the lab. He looked at the result. 99.9999% probability. Gideon Devereaux is the biological father. Gideon closed his eyes for a single heavy moment. He had a son. His son was dying. And a man named Brent Wallace had refused to pay a bill. He made 2 calls. The first was to Ms. Shaw. "Scramble the medevac team. They're at City General in 90 minutes. I want him in Boston in 4 hours. Get Dr. Aristham himself. I don't care that he's retired. Tell him I'm funding his entire research wing." The second call was to his head of security. "We're going to Seattle, now." Lauren was signing another formal waiver from the hospital administrator, who was nervously explaining that they couldn't be held liable if she refused their recommended course of action, which was palliative care. She was in effect being asked to sign a form that let her son die. "I won't sign this," Lauren said, her voice shaking with rage. "Ms. Bell, we just don't have the resources." The argument was cut short by a sudden commotion down the hall. Not the usual hospital bustle, but a deep rhythmic thud, thud, thud that was vibrating the windows. A helicopter. A moment later, the doors to the ICU burst open. It wasn't doctors. It was a team of 6 people in sleek, dark gray flight suits, led by a man with a military bearing. "We're here for Leo Bell," the leader said, his voice cutting through the room. "We are the transport team from Aperture Medical." The hospital staff froze. "I'm sorry, who authorized this?" the administrator stammered. "He did." A new figure filled the doorway. Lauren's heart stopped. It was him. George. Gideon Devereaux. He looked older than she remembered, his face carved with a stress and authority she couldn't have comprehended 7 years ago. He was flanked by 2 security guards who looked like they could break walls with their bare hands. He ignored everyone in the room except for her. His piercing gray eyes found hers. "Lauren," he said. His voice was quiet, but it commanded the entire space. "George, Gideon," she breathed. He didn't waste time. He walked directly to Leo's bedside. He looked down at the small, pale face, his own expression unreadable. He gently brushed a strand of hair off Leo's forehead. "He's beautiful," Gideon said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't place. He turned to the transport leader. "Move. Now." The team sprang into action with terrifying efficiency. They were disconnecting the city general machines and connecting Leo to a portable hyper-advanced monitoring system. "You can't do this," the administrator shouted, finally finding his voice. "This is against hospital policy. I'm calling security." Gideon's assistant, Ms. Shaw, who had appeared silently at his side, stepped forward. "Our security is already here," she said, nodding to the two guards. "And as of 10 minutes ago, an anonymous donation from one of our foundations has purchased this entire hospital wing. So, if you'll excuse us, we'll be moving our patient. You are, of course, welcome to call the new board of directors. I have their number right here." The administrator's face went white. Gideon turned back to Lauren. "They're taking him to the roof. The helicopter will fly you to the airport where a jet is waiting to take you to Boston. I'll meet you there." You're not coming?" Lauren asked, bewildered, as the team started rolling Leo's gurney out of the room. "I have a stop to make," Gideon said, his eyes turning to flint. "I have to deal with a man named Brent Wallace." Lauren bundled into the helicopter, watched the city shrink below her. The sound of the rotors was a deafening roar, but in her mind there was a sudden terrifying calm. The cavalry had arrived. But it wasn't a cavalry. It was an army. Meanwhile, across town, Brent Wallace was on the 18th green of the exclusive Summit Ridge Country Club. He was laughing with his boss, the CEO of Ascent Capital Partners, a man named Don. "So I told her," Brent bragged, lining up his putt. "Not my kid, not my Bill. You should have heard her, Don, crying, begging. It was pathetic." "Harsh, Brent," Don said, chuckling. "But smart. Kid's a money pit. You saved yourself a fortune." "Exactly," Brent said. He sank the putt. "That's how you win, Don. You cut off the dead weight. You just cut it off." His phone buzzed. It was an alert from his bank. He ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. Annoyed, he pulled it out. He had 5 new alerts from his private wealth account. Alert: your account has been frozen pending a legal review. Alert: a lien has been placed on your property at 45 Summit Ridge. Alert: your Maserati Ghibli license plate, BNT Win, has been marked for repossession. "What the hell?" Brent muttered. "Problem?" Don asked. Before Brent could answer, 2 men in dark suits walked directly onto the green. They were not golfers. "Brent Wallace," the first man said. "Yeah, this is a private club, pal." The man smiled, a thin, unpleasant expression. "Not anymore. Your membership was just revoked. You need to come with us." Brent looked at his boss, Don, who was suddenly looking very pale. "Don, what is this?" I just got an email, Brent," Don stammered, looking at his own phone. "Our primary investors, they're pulling out. Aperture Dynamics. They're calling in our note. All of it. Now." Aperture. Brent had never even heard of them. "Who the hell is Aperture?" The second man put a hand on Brent's shoulder. "He's the man who just bought your company, your house, and your car, and he'd like a word." The silence in the private suite at Boston Children's Hospital was a physical presence. It was nothing like the suffocating, stale silence of the waiting room at City General. This was a clean, buffered, and profoundly expensive quiet. The suite itself was larger than Lauren's entire apartment, a softly lit space with abstract art on the walls, a private sitting area with a skyline view, and the faint, clean scent of fresh-cut flowers. It was a room designed to insulate its occupants from the reality of the hospital outside. Lauren was sitting on a plush sofa, a cashmere blanket draped over her legs. She had finally stopped crying an hour ago, leaving her in a state of hollowed-out, adrenalized exhaustion. Across the room, Gideon Devereaux stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to her, his hands clasped behind him. He was a statue of bespoke suited tension staring down at the city lights. Leo was in the adjoining medical room sleeping peacefully. His surgery, a marathon 8-hour procedure, had been, in Dr. Aristom's words, a perfect success. The legendary surgeon, a man Gideon had pulled out of a multi-million-dollar retirement with a single phone call, had come out his scrubs soaked and given them the 2-word summary. Lauren had wept. She had slid down the wall and wept for her son, for the years of terror, for the sheer crushing relief. Gideon had simply nodded at the doctor, said, "Send me your research budget," and then walked to the window. Now in the 3 a.m. stillness, it was the first time they had been truly alone since the gala 7 years ago. The air was thick with everything unsaid. "Thank you," Lauren finally whispered. Her voice was raw. I can't. How do I ever—" "You don't," Gideon said, his voice quiet but absolute. He didn't turn around. "He is my son. I do what is required." The finality of his tone, the way he claimed Leo, sent a complex shiver through her, part relief, part fear. This was not George. This was a force of nature. I should have told you," she whispered, the guilt that had been simmering for days finally washing over her. "I should have tried harder to find you. The moment I knew I was pregnant, Why didn't you?" he asked, still facing the window. It wasn't an accusation, just a flat request for data. "I tried, I really did. I only had George and Aperture Dynamics. When I searched, I saw who you were. The articles. The reclusive trillionaire. The ghost of the valley. You weren't real. You were a concept. I was terrified. I thought—" She trailed off, rubbing her temples. "I thought you'd think I was lying, that I was an extortionist. Or worse, that you'd take him. That your lawyers would sweep in and he'd be this. A target. A line item on a balance sheet. I just wanted him to be a little boy, not a billionaire's secret." "So you protected him," Gideon said. He finally turned. His face was unreadable in the dim light, but his gray eyes were piercing. "You protected him from me and from him, the man who signed a decree." Lauren flinched. The mention of Brent brought the acidic burn of the courtroom, the humiliation, the terror flooding back. "Brent," she said, her voice hardening. You said you were going to see him, on the phone at the hospital. What happened? Did you talk to him?" Gideon took a small, measured sip of water from a glass on the sideboard. "I had Ms. Shaw, my counsel, do a full background check while we were in transit. A background check. Mr. Wallace is a partner at a mid-level venture capital firm. Ascent Capital Partners," Gideon recited as if reading a report. He was, to put it mildly, over-leveraged. His entire life was a performance financed by debt. "I knew he spent a lot, but he was a fraud," Gideon said simply, his voice devoid of emotion. "A small-time one, but sloppy. He was cooking the books, shuffling investor money between accounts to cover his personal expenditures. He was using new investor capital to pay dividends to old ones, a classic, if clumsy, Ponzi scheme. He was just arrogant enough to think no one would ever look closely." Lauren's mind struggled to connect the dots. How could you possibly know all this in just a day? "Because," Gideon said, a cold, flat light entering his eyes, "it turned out my primary holding company through a third-party equity firm was his largest investor. For the last 2 years, Brent Wallace has been stealing my money." Lauren gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "My God, you owned his debt." "I owned his company," Gideon corrected. "He just didn't know it. He was, for all intents and purposes, my employee, and I don't tolerate fraud. So while Dr. Aristom was preparing for surgery here in Boston, my legal team in New York was executing a hostile takeover of Ascent Capital Partners. We initiated a full forensic audit. It took them less than 3 hours to find the wire fraud, the embezzlement, everything. The SEC was notified. The U.S. Attorney's Office was given the complete file. He checked his watch, a simple, elegant piece that she now knew was worth more than her old apartment building. As of approximately 9 hours ago, Brent Wallace was arrested by federal agents on the 18th hole of the Summit Ridge Country Club. He is currently in federal custody. He has, of course, lost his job. All his assets, the house, the Maserati, the bank accounts, have been seized by my creditors to cover the money he stole. His new wife, Tiffany, upon discovering her credit cards were declined, filed for an emergency divorce citing irreconcilable financial differences. He has nothing. He is nothing. Lauren was speechless. She was dizzy. The sheer scale of the response, the speed, it was terrifying. In the time it took to save one life, Gideon had systematically, legally, and completely annihilated another. You did all that, she stammered, because he refused to pay. Gideon finally moved. He walked closer, stopping a few feet from her. His eyes were not angry. They were glacial. No, Lauren, he said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. I did all that because he refused to pay you. I did it because he heard a mother beg for her child's life, and he laughed. He bragged about it. He called my son dead weight. He told you, not my kid, not my bill. He held her gaze, and she saw the full, unshielded force of the man she'd met 7 years ago. He was right, Gideon said, his voice a razor. Leo is my kid, and Brent Wallace just found out how high the bill really is. The weight of his words settled in the room, absolute and final. The world had been reordered. A soft click of the door broke the spell. A nurse in pale blue scrubs poked her head in. Miss Bell, Mr. Devereaux. Leo's waking up. He's asking for his mom. Lauren shot to her feet, the cashmere blanket falling to the floor. Leo! It was the only word in her universe. She rushed toward the door but paused, looking back at Gideon. He hadn't moved. Aren't you... He looked past her at the door to the medical room, and for the first time Lauren saw not a king, not a force of nature, but a man who was completely and totally out of his depth. He could topple companies. He could command armies of lawyers and surgeons, but he was frozen on the threshold of that room. I will, he said, his voice suddenly uncertain. I need to learn how. Lauren understood. She gave him a small, trembling nod and pushed through the door. Mommy? Leo's voice was small and sleepy, his face pale against the white pillow, but his eyes were clear. I'm here, baby, she cried, rushing to his bedside and taking his small hand, kissing his forehead. I'm right here. It's all over, you did it. I had a weird dream, Leo mumbled, his eyes fluttering. There was a spaceship, and it was really loud. Lauren laughed, a real watery sob of a laugh. Close, baby. It was a helicopter. From the doorway, hidden in the shadows, Gideon Devereaux watched. He watched Lauren smooth her son's hair, her face a mask of such profound love that it ached. He saw his son look at her with perfect, simple trust. He had all the money in the world. He had all the power. But he did not have that. He stood there for a long time, an observer. He wasn't a father. He was a strategist, a builder, a king. But as he watched Lauren hold Leo's hand, he knew. He would spend every dollar of his impossible fortune and every second of his remaining life to learn. The 6 months that followed were not a whirlwind, but a slow, deliberate unfolding. The oppressive beige-walled fear of Lauren's old life receded, replaced by the warm, sunlit tones of her new reality. Gideon had insisted on moving them, and Lauren, after much debate, had agreed. She wasn't hidden away in one of his sterile fortress-like mansions. She was in a beautiful 4-story brownstone in Brooklyn on a quiet, tree-lined street. The rooms were filled with natural light, and the walls were quickly being covered with Leo's vibrant, happy, smeared artwork. For the first time in years, Lauren's home smelled like fresh coffee and hope, not stale anxiety. Her own identity, which had been smothered for so long, re-emerged. Gideon's people had discovered her old design portfolio, the one she'd all but abandoned. Within a month, she was offered a position not just as a designer but as the director of user experience for Aperture's new East Coast Design Lab. It was a position created for her, but one she had earned. She wasn't just a freelancer scraping by. She was a leader managing a team of 20. Her ideas listened to, respected, and implemented. The ambitious, talented woman Brent had tried to extinguish was back, and she was thriving. Leo was, in a word, reborn. The shadow of his illness was gone. The heart defect, so complex and terrifying, was now just a story Dr. Aristham told at medical conferences. Leo had color in his cheeks. He had boundless, chaotic energy. He was attending a private school just a few blocks away, and his backpack, which once held nebulizers and pill containers, was now just stuffed with library books and half-eaten snacks. The bubbly feeling in his chest had been replaced by a deep, infectious giggle. Gideon was present. He was not by any stretch of the imagination a normal father. He was still Gideon Devereaux, a man who operated on a global scale. But he was in his own awkward, intense, and quiet way trying. He flew in from his Wyoming compound every Friday evening. He didn't arrive by helicopter. Lauren had put her foot down about that, explaining that it terrified the neighbors. Now a simple black and completely bulletproof sedan would slide to the curb. His security detail, 2 men who never spoke, would wait at the front door. He and Leo had found their language chess. "That's a bad move, Gideon," Leo said one Saturday, pointing a small finger at the board. "You left your queen open." Gideon, a man who ran trillion-dollar global strategies, stared at the board. He had, in fact, left his queen open. He looked at his son, whose brow was furrowed in concentration. A strange, unfamiliar warmth bloomed in his chest. He wasn't Dad. He was, and perhaps always would be, Gideon. And as Lauren watched them from the kitchen sipping her coffee, she realized that was perfectly okay. It was real. While this new, strange family was learning its rhythm, Brent Wallace's world was being systematically and publicly dismantled. His reckoning was absolute. The trial was not in a small family court. It was in the U.S. District Court, a grand, intimidating room of dark wood and high ceilings. Brent, stripped of his bespoke suits and his smug confidence, was a hollowed-out version of his former self. His high-priced lawyers from Garland Price and LLP had dropped him the second Aperture's audit went public, citing irreconcilable conflicts. He was now represented by a court-appointed public defender who looked just as exhausted as Ms. Evans once had. Brent's only defense was to play the victim. He testified that he was the target of a conspiracy set up by his vindictive ex-wife and her new, unbelievably powerful lover. He tried to charm the jury to muster up the same arrogance that had carried him through life. It didn't work. The prosecuting attorney, a sharp, methodical woman from the U.S. Attorney's Office named AUSA Peterson, was not impressed. She didn't raise her voice. She simply and devastatingly presented the facts. "Mr. Wallace," she said, her voice cutting through the silent courtroom, "you've testified that you had significant doubts about the child's paternity. Is that correct?" "Yes," Brent said, trying to look pitiable. "I was a victim of paternity fraud. My ex-wife, she lied to me." "A victim," Peterson repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "I see. And when you were committing wire fraud, funneling $1.2 million from your investors' capital fund investors, including Aperture Dynamics, into a private offshore account in the Cayman Islands, were you also a victim then?" "Objection," his lawyer called out weakly. "That's unrelated." "Overruled," the judge said, his voice bored. "You opened this door, Mr. Wallace. Answer the question." That was a misunderstanding of the accounts," Brent stammered, his face turning a blotchy red. "A misunderstanding," Peterson said, picking up a new file. "Like when you leveraged those same stolen funds to secure the loan for your $200,000 Maserati Ghibli. Did you have significant doubts about whether that money was yours, Mr. Wallace?" Brent was silent. "Did you have doubts when you embezzled $80,000 to pay for your membership at the Summit Ridge Country Club, or the client dinners that were in fact vacations with your new wife, Tiffany, who I see is not present in court today." She paused, walking closer to the jury box. "It seems, Mr. Wallace, you were very certain and very confident when your own greed was at stake. Your doubts only materialized when a child's life was on the line, a child who for 4 years called you father." Her closing argument was the final nail. "This is not a complex man," she said, turning to the jury. "This is a simple one. He is a man who believes that what he wants is what he deserves. He wanted a luxury car, so he stole. He wanted a prestigious life, so he lied. And when he no longer wanted the responsibility of a family, he abandoned it in the cruelest way possible." She recounted the phone call, the one Lauren had been forced to make, the one Brent had bragged about. His ex-wife called him begging, not for herself, not for a car, but for a life-saving surgery. And what was his response? His exact words as he told his friends, "Not my kid, not my bill." The courtroom was utterly still. "He was half right," Peterson concluded, her voice ringing with cold fury. "It wasn't his kid, but this," she slapped the mountain of evidence binders, "this is all his fraud, and today, this is his bill." The jury deliberated for less than an hour, guilty on all counts. At the sentencing, the judge, citing Brent's profound and disturbing lack of remorse and callous disregard for human life, sentenced him to the maximum, 20 years in federal prison. Lauren read the news on her tablet. She was sitting on a bench in the park, the crisp autumn air rustling the leaves. A few yards away, Leo and Gideon were hunched over their chessboard set up on a stone park table. She watched them for a moment. Her son healthy. This strange, powerful man who was against all odds learning to be a father. "He was sentenced," Lauren said quietly. Gideon's shoulders tensed, but he didn't look up from the board. "I know. My legal team sent the update. 20 years, Gideon." She looked at his profile, searching his face. "They gave him the maximum. It's a lot." Gideon finally looked up. His gray eyes, which so often looked through people, were focused intently on her. It's his whole life?" she whispered. "It's over." Gideon's gaze was steady, his voice quiet but heavy with absolute conviction. He tried to end Leo's. "He sat in his luxury car celebrating with his friends while my son was dying in a hospital." "I know," Lauren said, a shiver running through her despite the warm coat. "It's not enough," Gideon said. "The anchor line. What he tried to take from you, from us, there's no price for that. He didn't just refuse a payment, Lauren. He made a choice. He heard a mother beg for her child's life and he chose cruelty. This is just the consequence." The heavy moment hung between them, thick with the unsaid, the past, the impossible new future. It was Leo who broke it. "Okay, I see it," he announced, his small brow furrowed. He picked up his bishop and slid it diagonally across the board. "Checkmate!" Gideon stared. He blinked, rerunning the last 3 moves in his head. He was a man who ran billion-dollar simulations, who anticipated market shifts and global power plays. And his 6-year-old had just trapped him in a perfect, elegant net. A short, sharp breath escaped him. It was a sound Lauren had never heard before, a laugh. It was real, unguarded, and full of astonishment. He looked up at Lauren, and the ice in his eyes had been replaced by a bright, burning fire. "He's brilliant." Lauren smiled, a real peaceful smile that reached her eyes. She looked at her son, who was already setting the pieces up for a new game, and at the man who was finally his father. "I know." Brent Wallace had refused to pay a few $1,000s in child support, all to inflict a petty cruelty. He thought he was saving money. He thought he was winning. But he wasn't just refusing a bill. He was refusing a child. And in doing so, he had drawn the attention of the real father, a man who measured his wealth in nations, and who measured his justice in absolute, undeniable, and total ruination. Brent Wallace learned the hard way that you should never, ever stand between a parent and their child. He thought his money and his status made him untouchable. He believed he could use his power to crush his ex-wife and the little boy he once called his son. But he made one critical mistake. He had no idea who he was really dealing with. He refused to pay a few $1,000s for a child's life, and in return, he paid with his company, his freedom, and his entire future. Lauren and Leo's story shows us that karma might be slow, but when it arrives, it is often brought by the very people we least expect. The universe has a way of balancing the books, and sometimes the bill for cruelty is higher than you can ever imagine. What did you think of Brent's downfall? Was it justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more true life stories of justice and karma. We see your support, and it means the world to us.